That's really cool. So yeah, welcome everyone to Across the Ponds podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me, Mr. Adam Swart from Crowds on Demand. Crowds on Demand is a, how do I put this, an advocacy group. Um, I'll just read it from the website. Crowds on Demand is your home for impactful advocacy campaigns, demonstrations, PR stunts, crowds for hire, and corporate events. That is some beautiful marketing language, I gotta say.
Thank
Adam,
you.
thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on your program. Great to chat with you and your listeners and hopefully have a great dialogue here.
I'm 100% sure we will. So I guess first things first. The crowds on demand also very much specializing in paid protesting. Am I
hmm
saying that right?
That's right.
So
Right.
in I guess in your own words, what is paid protesting? Because it's such a broad definition, really, and can be
Well,
taken in so
yes.
many ways.
It's a great question. It's no different from being a paid lawyer or a paid doctor or a paid podcast host. Generally, when you do work that helps somebody, you receive payment for your services. So, demonstrating is just simply one example of that. Now, again, if you're, think about it this way, if you're a left wing attorney or a right wing attorney, right, you would probably most likely take left wing or right wing clients, but you would still request that those clients pay for your services. Why? Because otherwise, you won't be able to feed your family, right? So essentially, the concept of compensating activists is actually, it's premised on the idea that a lot of people want to go out and protest for a cause that they believe in, but kids, they have responsibilities, they have jobs, right? They can't just simply take that time. We facilitate those people participating in public protests to express their view.
Oh, wow. Okay. So how does that work? Do they just get a paycheck in the mail, or because there's so much to do with
Sure.
protesting, especially over the last, let's say 5 years.
Yes, of course. Well, yeah, I mean, it works the way that you would get paid for any other occupation. One difference is that generally you're not. There are some campaigns that we have at Crowds on Demand where we have protesters outside a building every single day for years on end, right? So sometimes this has happened, but generally when it's a one-off protest, let's just say you're an environmentalist. You really want to protest for the environment, and let's just say, I'm just going to give you an example of our kind of engagement, right? So you're an environmentalist, right? Well, let's just say the residents of a particular area, who it's a very rich neighborhood, don't want like a power plant being built near their neighborhood because it's, polluting or whatever. And but these are wealthy residents that don't like it because it's creating an eyesore. So they pay us and they say, okay, well, Crowds on Demand, we want to kind of block this power plant. Well, what we'll do is, okay, it doesn't sound very sympathetic to say wealthy residents don't want an eyesore, right? So what we would say is, okay, well, who else would be against this? Well, environmentalists. So we would get environmentalists out there to protest it on environmentalist grounds. So we compensate them. Hey, this is something that they agree with anyway, but hey, there's no shortage of environmental catastrophes right now. So if we didn't compensate them, they might put their time elsewhere. So we're compensating them for their time, but we're not compensating them for their views.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. So you look um for the bigger, more well-known parties, bigger, more well-known goals, if you
Well, what
will.
we're trying to
So,
do is oftentimes we get hired by a niche interest, but we
mhm.
have to tap into the larger zeitgeist, right? So, for example, in the Me Too era, the Me Too era with so we've been like, okay, let's just say, you have one company, like somebody doesn't like this company for whatever their reasons are. Well, they find out the CEO is a perv, right? Well, maybe we protest them, from the women's rights, feminist angle, right? Even though our client's gripe might be of a different nature. Do you see what I'm saying? So what we're doing is what we want to do is try to tap into the zeitgeist with our narratives. That's part of my job. Is somebody might be like, oh, well, I don't really like this company because I feel like they overcharged me. Well, it's like, yeah, but nobody really cares. So, well, what is the bigger thing that we can do to come after this company? Okay, well, their CEO is a perv. Okay, well, we can protest it on that angle. You know what I mean? So you're finding different angles of attack, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. I have read that that example on your website where a business was owned by a well, let's call it a perv.
Yeah,
And
that one is the perv is even kind of an understatement for that guy.
Yeah, but let's try.
But yeah, to try to stay away
keep
from
it
that.
somewhat clean.
Yes,
Sure.
exactly. Yeah, they're but here's, I guess the way that I'll put it is that we're always looking for different angles of attack, right? So like I said, for the wealthy residents, maybe we use the environmental angle. For a corporate dispute, maybe we use a feminist angle. So you're always looking at how do you make something bigger, because our goal is to create movements and create a catalyst, right? So the way you create a catalyst is making this accessible and making it persuasive. So that's kind of what we do.
Don't your own feelings and opinions get in the way sometimes?
Well, they do, and I lose business because of it sometimes, because I don't. There are certain causes I don't want to take on, and sometimes it costs me money.
Could you name some examples of
Well,
those?
first of all, have you ever heard of the term Overton window? It's an American term. It's basically the window of acceptable political discourse. Now, that changes over time, of course, as you'd imagine, but there are certain things that I would say that are outside the Overton window. So therefore, for example, groups that are hateful, right? Groups that are, funded by some shady foreign entity, right? Groups that are trying to create division and chaos in the United States. I mean, obviously, crowds on demand, one of the reasons I'm coming on your podcast and other shows is to make it very clear we don't engage in illegal activity, right? So obviously, if it's anything that's illegal, we wouldn't engage in anything like that, or defamatory or that kind of thing, right? So part of it is mitigating our risk, right? So where we don't want to obviously engage in any illegal activity, but part of it is, hey, it is legal to be hateful, right? In the United States, at least, right? We have free speech. You can be a very hateful person, but that's still legal, but we still don't want to engage with it.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, we've especially over the last 5 years with the larger protesting groups, let's say the more well-known ones, they are well known to not be as peaceful, let's
Well,
say.
that's correct, and we don't engage in any of that. So when people see that, there's this sort of misinformation that's spread on the internet, right? Like, oh, that's crowds on demand. It's like, well, that's absolutely not. That we don't engage in any of that stuff. I mean, think about it. I'm a businessman. It wouldn't even make sense for me to do that.
No, you wouldn't want to be associated with groups of that nature. I can totally understand that. So those are other benefactors, more people who don't really care about the reputation or have other goals, perhaps.
Well, I think when it comes to illegal activity, you have to consider that you have to follow the money. Because in protests, right, we in the United States, I can speak to the United States because I know the title is called the Across the Pond podcast. So I can only speak on an American perspective because I know my friends in the United Kingdom, they don't have full free speech over there, right? And I strongly condemn the attitude of the United Kingdom government on free speech. And it's not a conservative or liberal talking point because they, in fairness to them, they have put liberals or leftists and conservatives in prison for what they call it is incitement, right?
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, well, the what they consider incitement is a pretty broad swath of speech. So I think it's just so unfortunate that Britain, which is the birthplace of modern free speech and modern free thought, has decided that they want to open the door to potentially to putting people in prison for thought crimes. So I strongly condemn that. But that's sort of tangential to my point. But I just want to be clear because I know a lot of your audience is in Europe, so I'm speaking from an American perspective on our rules on free speech are tend to be very permissive as they should be. But when it comes to illegal activity, that's very separate. So if you're blocking a road without a permit, if you are vandalizing, if you're throwing stuff at police officers or whatever, that is not a protest. That is violence and needs to be treated as such. My theory on those protests is that a lot of them are funded from abroad, from hostile regimes. And the thesis is this, and there's a lot of evidence for it, is a lot of these countries, they don't want their people asking for freedom, right? They don't want people to ask for sort of the Western values. So what they love to do is be like, look at the streets of Paris, look at the streets of New York, look at the streets of Los Angeles, look at the chaos they have, look at the brutality of their police, and look at the chaos, right? So you don't want what the West has. So it's a way that they amplify. I mean, historically, they did this on state TV, but now they're even using social media and AI to advance these sort of fake news. So it's very unfortunate. And they're funding protests in the United States, not protests, but this sort of violence to kind of amplify that. So it's very, very unfortunate that that is the case.
It's the Hegelian dialect. They cause the problem and sell you the solution. Really,
That's
like
correct. That's correct.
yeah. So how would you go on to set up a protest like you already named, like women's rights groups, for example, or
Okay.
environmental groups? Do you just like write an email to them, write a letter? How does that go? Like I don't know. This is so far outside of my scope.
Well, we've been in business 13 years, right? So we do have kind of a method to our madness. We have a network of people that we tap into, number one. And number two, we strategically outreach to people where when needed, and build those sort of relationships. But a lot of those relationships are strategic, and they're relationships of mutual benefit, right? So in the sense of, I use the example of like a feminist group. We
Hmm.
we have feminist groups that we know across the country, and in some cases they might say, yeah, you know what, we don't want to involve ourselves in this particular thing. So then we might try a different group, or we may not always work with groups. We may just have individual feminists, for example. In the case that we can't get a group to help us, we may just use individual people, or in some cases we create our own group.
Yeah, I saw, I read something like that on your website, that even for some clients, you set up entire NGOs
That's
for
correct,
that.
and we run them.
You still run those
Oh
NGOs.
yeah.
Those don't get dismantled after the
Well,
goal has
some
been
of them,
reached.
do. So I'll tell you, I'll put it this way. Sometimes the objectives keep getting loftier, right? So you may start something with two short-term goals, and
Mhm.
then you achieve those short-term goals, and then you have the medium-term goal. And in some cases you achieve one of your two goals, but then you still want to work to achieve the other one. So maybe one you achieve really quickly, and one is going to take longer. I mean, no one gets everything they want all the time. So sometimes you keep these groups in business, and other times what we have is groups that are, what I say, like, we keep them in the background. So we kind of run it at a very kind of low level, and then when they need them back, we bring them back.
Okay, that makes sense, I
But
guess.
it's
And
just
if you
having a network of these groups is very effective.
Yeah, networking is definitely the way to go. I've heard that a lot. I've noticed that a lot. It's not who you are, it's who you know, really. Um, a question that came from one of my co-hosts,
Mhm.
actually, something that he has noticed, and myself as well. I have been involved in protests of of different kinds. I've been on the museum square in Amsterdam during the COVID times. I even was sort of back in my more edgier days part of the Occupy movement here in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
It's it seems that was a lot of fun actually in my
I'd
returns.
imagine. Yeah, and you guys know how to protest out in your neck of the woods. I mean, I was reading actually about how you guys the cars were like took over the city of Amsterdam in the 60s and 70s, and people literally like took to the streets saying like get the cars the heck out. And that like you think now of Amsterdam as this like very bike, train, tram friendly city, but 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it wasn't, and that was because of the actions of protests. But it's so protests achieve a lot of ends, and it probably could never have been achieved without protests to actually build the Amsterdam that Americans and Dutch and others really love, and the one that we recognize today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In a lot of the major Dutch cities, it is highly disencouraged to to drive your car into the city center. Also, because the roads are just that small, it's really
That's correct.
not handy. A lot of sharp turns. But what I remember from my times and what I've heard from my co-host is that there are usually a few people who really know what they are talking about, but then like so many other people who are, I don't know, more like pawns or crowd fillers.
Mm-hmm.
My co-host Lee, he gave the example of he didn't mention a specific group, but that someone got interviewed for for the media, for TV probably, and they really had no idea what they were talking about. So someone else had
Sure,
to kind of work their way in for those
sure,
kinds of protests. Is
sure.
there
Well, let's
a
unpack that.
yeah?
Yeah,
Is there
let's
a
unpack
certain
that a little bit. So,
sure?
so one of the things is that crowds are man. Let me just first speak about ourselves and second about the broader protests industry, right? So, and for us, we try to make sure that everyone is passionate about the cause and is well informed, and that the leaders are media ready, right? So that's to say that if you have a group of 50 people, they're all going to be passionate about the subject, but some are going to know more and some are going to know less. The fact that someone is not intimately familiar with the talking points and are not um, equipped to speak to the media does not mean that they don't care about an issue, right? So I think the media kind of like a lot of people are very camera shy. And a lot of times that what happens is left-wing media goes to a right-wing event, right-wing media goes to a left-wing event, and they go interview like 50 people, and they're like, well, let's just take the two dumbest people and then amplify that and act as if, oh, these people are fools, right? Or the left-wing media tends to try to make the right-wing protesters look racist. The right-wing media tries to make the left-wing protesters kind of look like dumb pothead hippies, clueless, right? So regardless, they this is a typical tactic by the media. Um, so the fact that everyone isn't brilliantly informed doesn't mean they don't care about an issue. I think that's a misnomer. Um, that I guess that's my take on it. I mean, of course, there are extreme examples, and again, I'm not saying there aren't groups that might pay homeless people to protest. I mean, when we started this company 13 years ago, we weren't above doing that, but we don't do that anymore. Um, so um, because frankly, that's not effective because ultimately it's going to catch up to you, right? Like you're always going to have. I mean, if you go to Starbucks, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a good coffee. 1 time out of 10, you're going to get a coffee that sucks, right? So does that mean Starbucks is a terrible company that doesn't know how to make coffee? No, it means that they didn't hire this person right, and they should fire him, right? So I would say it's the same in protests, right? Just because you can talk to a couple of protesters who are not well informed doesn't mean that the broader movement lacks legitimacy.
Okay. Yeah. No, so that's really the media doing media things, really.
Well,
Of
yeah, the
course
biased
they,
media, as we know,
yeah.
is all media these days. There's very little objective media. So, and protests play into that fact, by the way. So as a protest organizer, you try to build protests if the what the client wants is media attention, which isn't always the goal. But if what they are looking for is media attention, ideally what you want to do is feed into their preconceived views, right? So on the left, for example, like look at the Jussie Smollett. Do you know, remember this guy?
I do. Yeah.
So he was this like kind of very like C to D list actor, part I think African American, maybe part African American, who kind of claimed he was a victim of a hate crime, and
Yeah.
as they sort of unpacked his claims, it kind of looked more and more like he may not have been telling the truth. I mean, it looked pretty fanciful. I don't know the facts of it, but the general consensus was that it was kind of fanciful, but left-wing media basically really amplified it because it was like, okay, it fed into their preconceived kind of notions of, okay, America is racist, there are white supremacists lurking on every corner, whatever. So protests are the same way, is that you essentially you're going to get more coverage if you have a narrative that goes along with what someone's already looking to cover.
That's true. Yeah, of course. I've also seen, and I just, this is just more of a general question of how big of a role the media has in all of this, because I have seen those pictures of, like on TV, it looks like a whole crowd has gathered, but then someone from, I don't know, like third, fourth floor up takes a picture, and it's really just, a host standing in front of, maybe a couple dozen people, and it's just
Well, press
really good
conferences, this is
camera
a
work.
common thing, and we've done. I mean, but what you're looking at, like, can we unpack if we could the ethics of this for a second, right? Because what
Sure.
you're trying to do is what is the purpose of a protest? I've had this argument with a lot of people about this, and I think a lot of people misinterpret what the purpose of a protester. In your case, you may also be referring to sort of a press conference, right? A product release type of thing. What is the
Yeah,
purpose?
yeah.
In my mind, the purpose is as a catalyst and as an awareness mechanism, right? So the goal of protest is to get people to notice it. Number one, the people who are standing around the protest, if you're protesting the Congress, you want the Congress to see you, right? But also secondarily to amplify it so that, people who will see it on media, social media. I think that there is a misinterpretation that a protest is sort of supposed to be a plebiscite and supposed to be some sort of indication of this is how the broader country feels on a subject. So if there's 300 people who come out on one side of an issue and 50 people who come out on the other side of the issue, there's this perception of, oh, well, then the people are 6-1 in favor of that issue. Well, that's kind of a stupid way of looking at it. That's misinterpreting what the essence of protest is. What protest is a way to get attention and to persuade people and to get your messaging in front of as many people as possible. So if you have 3 people out there protesting, you're probably not going to be able to amplify your message. Whereas if you have 50 people, your odds are higher. If you have 1,000 people, your odds are even higher. So what compensating people does is it's like buying an advertisement on TV, where you basically say, hey, we really want you to know about what we're selling. So instead of selling Cheetos or Doritos or Coca-Cola. We're selling, here's why you should be on this side of the issue.
Oh, okay. Oh, like that. So it's to grab the attention and to amplify the message. Really, it's
Correct.
the gateway to and a very effective one too. We've definitely seen that over the last few years. Um,
Yes.
One thing that I'm personally also very curious about. I work in security. I have worked in um, local, more localized law enforcement with those larger protests, just the regular peaceful ones, of course. How do you communicate that with the local authorities so that they don't go riling up the crowd so that they may have an excuse to break it up? Because we've
Well,
seen that, especially in Amsterdam, we've seen that a lot over the
Well,
last few
correct,
years.
and it's important to develop good relationships with the local authorities. The way that I look at it is the best thing you can do as a protester is to know your rights and to know your responsibilities. So, to know, for example, one of the things that they always try to make you think is that you need a permit to demonstrate. You do not need a permit to demonstrate unless you have amplified sound like a giant speaker system,
Hmm.
staging, or want to block a street. You do not need a permit to go outside a building and rally as long as you're on public ground. So they like you to think you need a permit, so because that disincentivizes you from acting, right? So you have to know your rights. You have the right to stand wherever you want as long as it's on public ground and as long as you're not blocking people. So one thing to do is to know your rights, but to respect law enforcement, because in a free country, the purpose of law enforcement is not to disband protests, it is actually to keep protesters safe. So, to remind the authorities that actually the responsibility is not to dissuade protests, but in fact to keep protesters safe. So, I sort of see local authorities as actually our allies, right? We want to work with you to make sure that we're safe, and that, because what happens sometimes is you're protesting a company. Well, the building security is trying to kick you out. Well, building security has absolutely no authority. So law enforcement, sometimes you have protesters out on the street outside a company, and the company is like, oh, well, we'll call the police. I'm like, please call the police, because the police will remind you that we have the First Amendment right to be there. So we generally work very well with police. You just have to be friendly but firm with them and remind them of your rights, and but not in an obnoxious manner. Like the thing that some protesters do of starting to film them is like, try not to escalate, right? Like, again, I see,
Yeah.
like, when you stick a camera in a police officer's face, that is escalating this. Where I use the same tactic I use for customer service. If there is a sorry, will respect, the higher officers are going to be more cognizant of the rights of demonstrators than the lower officers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the local authorities, um they should be your friends. Yeah, absolutely. But
Correct, and they may not love dealing with protesters, but
mhm.
it is part of their job, and most of them have no problem with us. And but establishing a clear line of communication is critical.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand that, and it's funny, like you talked about building security and them calling the police. It's oftentimes, this is just speaking from my role and experience as someone working in security. It is more because it's seen as a nuisance, really, and they're trying to
Yeah,
to
but
put
in
it
a
on
free
like, oh,
country, you can be a
they're
little
not
bit of a
supposed to
nuisance.
be here.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, as in a free country, you can be a little bit of a nuisance. So that's the thing. So it's okay. So the
yeah.
fact that the building security doesn't like it, that's their problem. You know what I mean? So But part of it is knowing your rights, because a lot of people times the building security will act as if they're police officers and be like, oh, you have to go now, and order you as if. So people, I always train the people who run our protests to be cognizant of their rights.
Unfortunately, there are definitely security
And a
officers
lot of them
who,
are off-duty cops or former police officers, so they're used to having authority in those situations, but they don't have authority. Building security has no authority other than to call the police, which is a good thing. So yeah, so
yeah,
knowing your rights is important, but respecting local law enforcement and not escalating confrontation with them is important, right? Like, to me, you only take your camera out in the very as a very last resort, because I think it's very escalatory when people do that.
it is. Yeah, it most definitely is. I would absolutely, well, or at least very much dislike it if what is a peaceful protest. It happens too much nowadays.
Well, the
You know,
problem is that a lot of the Antifa type people, right? And there's kind of this sort of overlap with the Occupy movement. I'll get to why the Occupy movement was the biggest failure of any movement in protest history in a second. But the Antifa type people, the problem is these guys are vaguely anarchists. So for me, as a capitalist, I respect authority, right? I respect police officers, and I believe that they actually help me do my job easier because they protect us from anyone who's hostile. Now, the problem with the Antifa, Occupy type people, or the equivalent folks on the right, is that they ultimately don't respect law enforcement. They are vaguely anarchists. So for them, they don't want to work with law enforcement, and they want to break the law to some degree. Some of them want to get arrested. So that's the challenge. It's funny because you mentioned that you kind of had some involvement with Occupy. Um, Tell me if I'm wrong, but in my thesis, is Occupy was probably the least successful movement in protest history, and I'll tell you why. Um, I I rate success based on the number of people involved to what was ultimately achieved, right?
hmm
So if you think about it, and the climate that they operate in. So you're talking about 2009, 2010, right? This is the Great Recession, right? Um, and the the banks had screwed people over. The corporate America had screwed people over. Every people were out of jobs, right? And we had a left wing president. Obama, at least at the time, he was thought to be a left wing president. He tended to be more. But the point is, these Occupy people, they came out, they had no specific demands, right? They had no specific ask. They were just sort of camping in Wall Street and around the country. They had no specific demands, right? They should have said, and they weren't aiming at the right people. They were saying, yeah, dude, corporations suck, man, right? Okay. It made it so easy for politicians to pay lip service and say, yes, you're right, the corporations do suck, but not take action. No CEOs were imprisoned. No legislation was really made. These companies that they were protesting now are more profitable than ever. And many of the executives who were executives then are still executives now. So my point is, it was one of the biggest failures of all time, given how many people were out there, that you had, at least in the United States, essentially a left-wing president and a left-wing majority, huge majority in both of the legislative branches, the Senate and the House, right? If there was any time where you could pass legislation to basically say, we are going to change American corporate structure, it would have been under Occupy, and they fundamentally failed. So it's one of the biggest failures in protest history.
Unfortunately, I am going to have to agree with you on that. It had so much potential, but thinking back to it, I was part of back then Occupy Haarlem and a little bit of Occupy Amsterdam, of course.
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest one here in the Netherlands.
I'd imagine.
It was a lot of talk about like, oh, the 1% is bad. We have to like it's the defeat or something the 1%, but no no plan,
No specific
no,
action.
yeah, no demands or whatever.
You
It's
don't
just,
want to do in advocacy. I'll give you free advice. If you're, I would tell you this if you're my client, but I'm going to give all of your listeners, just for your show, some free advice.
well, thank you very much.
Do not make demands that make it easy for politicians to give you lip service, but not consequentially act, right? So, what Occupy did is it made it super easy. They made it super easy for politicians to pay them lip service, to agree in principle. Yes, the 1%. Yes, the companies are bad, but not consequentially act. Like, that is the worst thing you can do as a protest. You need to say, we have 10 demands, we want all 10, maybe we'll settle for 5, but we're not settling for 0.
Yeah, yeah. No, I thinking back, to those times, it was, it unfortunately was mostly just a bunch of hippies,
Yeah.
screaming, like F the 1%
And these
and
were
all of
people who
that.
had no experience with advocacy, so
Yeah.
they didn't fully understand. And I think on one level it was admirable that they didn't want to have top down leadership, because the whole thing was about dismantling corporate hierarchies. So they didn't want to have top down leadership. But on the other hand, that made it impossible for them to negotiate from a position of strength and from a position of, hey, these are our demands, and this is what we've, even to say, hey, this is what we voted on. But they lack that coherent message. So what they did was, politicians paid lip service. Ultimately, the economy recovered, and then the demands for their ultimately a lot, it waned, and then boom, you're gonna have to wait for another recession to actually build a movement like that, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it really indeed was also a matter of, I mean, the horizontal power structure, let's say, it's a very good idea, but if
Yes.
everybody is in control, nobody is in control,
Well,
really.
I think you have to have this mix, right? Like, for example, BLM started that way, and then they had top-down leadership, but then their leadership were kind of like hucksters, right? Like, they basically like used all the money to get themselves like villas and stuff like that, right? So essentially, the downside of having leaders is leaders are naturally corrupt. I mean, people power corrupts, as they say. And I don't
Yeah.
know these people. Well, I do actually know the people in BLM. I was about to say I don't know them, but I actually do know some of them, because some of these guys actually contacted me about, I don't know, what is it, 2025, about 10 years ago. So when BLM started, so people think BLM started in 2020 because it
Hmm.
probably gained the most prominence with the George Floyd, but it
Yeah.
actually started closer to 2014-15. And those guys actually came to me for advice, and I gave them advice, then they didn't take my advice. Um,
Oh.
so it's very interesting. I basically said it should be about Black economic empowerment, and basically bringing ownership in the Black community to basically elevate the Black family, elevate Black businesses, to actually fundamentally regain power, because from money and ownership is power. So the fundamentals of why Black people are oppressed in the United States is the lack of power of money and ownership, so that no one actually has to compete for their vote. You know what I mean? And the other thing is, if they know you're going to be Democrat 100% of the time, why would the Democrats do anything for you, right? You have to be like, I'm a swing voter. I'm going to vote for whoever's going to advance my cause. So
Yeah.
I gave them that advice. Instead they went this other direction, which scored them some temporary wins, but now every single thing that they've advocated for has been repealed under this administration, because the end of the day, what they were asking for was fundamentally unfair, and yeah, so it's and stupid. So defund the police, DEI, all this stuff, which has just been a total mess and is being dismantled. If they had argued for economic empowerment, Black people would be in a much, much better place than they are today in the United States.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I very much agree with that. That would have been much better. Instead, indeed made it about violence, and
Yes.
specifically the unfortunately, of course, the the white versus black, the white man versus the black man, and all of that. It's all it's too basic, and
Yeah.
it'll get you
And
some
again, it
sympathy.
was so performative. All the companies were basically like, "Oh yeah, we love DE company. Horror America loves DEI because they're basically like instead of actually like, for example, Coca Cola murders millions of black people, every year, honestly, with the diabetes and
Mm,
heart disease caused by their products. Murders is a strong word, but they market these products to Black Americans specifically, right? Like, go. It sounds like you spent a lot of time in the United States. Go look at the ads, right? With like McDonald's or Coca Cola, they market to Black people specifically, and they market some of their most sugary products, right, to the Black community, right? So they're killing the Black people with their products, but then they're like, oh well, let's not. Then we love Black people. We have like a Black guy on the board, so don't complain. Shut the fuck up. Yeah, sorry, my. But
no,
that's what
no,
but that's what DEI lets them do. It's basically like, hey, we have two Black women on the board, so don't worry about the fact that we're destroying Black health in this country with all this food.
yeah, it's all very um performative, just like the month of June with Pride, for
Yeah,
example. A lot of
yeah,
companies will
correct.
all of a sudden have a rainbow flag hanging, or on social media, a rainbow profile picture, like, oh, we love the gays
Right,
as
right,
long
right.
as you spend money on us.
Yep, very
Yeah,
true.
yeah, all very performative, and it works every
Yes.
year. Every year again,
And like
it
that's what I
works.
was saying. If you're running a protest movement and your goal is policy change, don't ever let people get away with performative.
Yeah,
I mean, and of course, it's the case on the right too. I mean, people are asking about Epstein, and instead, Trump is like, "Oh, well, I demand that the Washington Commanders football team be renamed to the Redskins." Right? So it's like he's performing kind of for his base, like on that. Right? He's trying to sort of distract from like the real thing by kind of feeding them red meat on this kind of like cultural wedge issue. So try not to fall for the performative if your goal is policy. If your goal is policy.
yeah. No, no, that's yeah. The performance is nice. It'll get you some sympathy, but no real change.
Yep.
Unfortunately, happens.
Yep.
Um, let's see to make it a little lighter. This has been very heavy. I do absolutely love it, but you also do a lot of like product launches and
Yes.
PR campaigns, and
Yes.
I was actually just talking about that with a colleague of mine in the car today. I'm lucky enough to be able to carpool with him, and to him it really sounded, and please do correct me if I'm wrong in that you can make somebody, let's say, famous from pretty much scratch just by hiring people to be, I don't know, fans or some paparazzi
Yeah, and
or
that wouldn't be a one-time thing, but over time, yes. And same with a product. So I'll talk a little bit about like PR stunts. Like one thing we want to do is in a PR stunt, we want to draw the right kind of attention to the product. One of my favorite ones that we did was this one called Bankers Against Bitcoin, where we had, this was in the earlier days of Bitcoin. We got hired by a large Bitcoin company to basically do these, have a staged opposition of these bankers dressed in like old frumpy suits, protesting against Bitcoin because they couldn't line their pockets like they do, without Bitcoin. So that was kind of a funny one, right? One of the other ones that I like, and kind of less of a PR stunt, but more kind of on the fun side, is we've staged weddings before. So we had this one wedding where we were hired by a very, very wealthy couple from abroad, where it was a very wealthy gentleman from another country, who was marrying kind of a lady from blonde lady from America who was kind of maybe like of not a great not did not come from a great family exactly. Like I guess you could say like kind of like trailer park vibes. I don't mean that in a negative way,
No, but
uh,
I
but
understand.
not
Yeah,
not the kind of girl that you would want to bring home to very wealthy parents from abroad, right? Like, so
sure.
they were like, okay, well, we need like a better caliber of audience for the wedding to be her friends, right? So instead of like the type of people who probably she associated with, they wanted to be like kind of young professionals, like I don't know, people like maybe who look like me, right? So we had I think like 100 or 200 young professionals all as like guests for this wedding, right, to be her friends. But then it got weirder because like a week before the wedding they were like, oh well, we actually also need the family, right? So they were like, okay, we need some uncles, some aunts, right? So we did the same thing. And then like maybe like literally like 3 days before the wedding they're like, okay, well, we didn't think about this, but we need a father of the bride. So I even provided the dad too. I was like, I need like a white guy, like about 65 years old, and I need him to cry as he's walking down the aisle with his daughter. So I did. It was like perfect. So, but what was funny is I told everybody needs like this crazy backstory, because the family is going to ask, oh, how do you know her, right?
Yeah.
So I said I had everybody preparing for like, a long time, like what, who are we, how do we know her? But then at the end of the day, none of the groom's family even spoke English, so it was all unnecessary.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a whole lot of effort wasted,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
but the point is that the goal was to have credible people, and as far as I know, they're still married.
Oh, well, that's great results.
So mom and dad approved.
Well, that's great, actually. Oh, that's I
So
never
we do a lot
imagined.
of very strange events. I'd put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, that is definitely something that I wouldn't have thought of. Like, literally, I need better friends.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah.
I'm gonna hire better friends.
Well, it's available. I mean, it's kind of expensive. I don't necessarily think it's a good fit for everybody, but for what they were looking for, it was.
Love conquers all, I guess.
That's right. That's right.
And with those backstories, do you let the people write that out themselves? Because they kind of have to be
Sometimes, yeah.
coordinated.
Well, I'll tell you this. It really all of these type of things and everything we do in terms of the narrative, it's a culmination of us and the client. So sometimes the client has very, very specific requests, and it's basically like, crowds on demand, executed. Sometimes it is they're like, you're the expert. Here's what we're looking to do. You say whatever you need that's in furtherance of those objectives.
Okay, okay, because I can imagine that, um, especially with like aunts and uncles, like like the wedding you mentioned, if they are together, the backstory has to
It has to make
line
sense.
up.
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Well, we will make sure of that. I mean, well, this is kind of a more unique type of event. We don't stage weddings every week, but you know, we it was certainly a fun one, and we like to do this type of thing.
yeah. No, yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. Sounds like a great challenge as well. But and you mentioned the was it bankers against Bitcoin?
Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, so you provided the opposition. How
Yes.
does so,
Well, in this case, it was a tongue in cheek kind of thing. It wasn't meant to be
mhm.
serious. But in other cases, we will actually provide the opposition that is serious. So in this case, it was like it was supposed to be a joke, right? It was
Okay.
so ridiculous. I think no one would actually interpret this as serious. But in other cases, that wouldn't have been the case.
So how would that work? Like, wouldn't
Well, I'll
you?
put it this way: you were defined both by who you are, what you are for, but you are also defined as what is against you. Think about the movie. One old example is the movie Passion of the Christ. Remember that one from the early 2000s, Mel Gibson?
Yeah.
Well, the Christians, right, the religious Christians, they really protested it. They were so mad against it, but that actually made it wasn't going to be that popular of a movie, but because of all the backlash, it became popular. So sometimes you create your own opposition to create backlash to create more attention, which then helps your product or your cause.
Oh, like that. Okay, that
You
is
define yourself by your opposition. Because if they don't want you to see it, how good must it be if they don't want you to see it?
that is most definitely true, and that is that's also very much human nature. Like, you tell us to not do something, you tell us to not, watch that movie. We're
That's the
gonna
only one
want
you
to
want to
do it.
watch now. If there's
Yeah,
10
yeah.
movies, you say you can watch any of them except this one, then they want to watch it. There's something about us that wants the forbidden thing, number one, but also that if the right people are opposing you, let's just say it's a conservative politician, and I don't know. I mean, like, I'll use a Dutch example. If Mr. Wilders, right,
Mm.
is out there speaking, and people who are dirty hippies are out there protesting him, that helps him. He says, "This is who I'm against." You know what I mean? Of course I know. Of course they're protesting me. Like, it helps him that if they were protesting him, was like, or if people in burqas were protesting him, or the whatever, he'd be like, yes, they are protesting, and it's good. That's what I'm up against. You see what I'm saying? Like, so to use a
Yeah,
Dutch
yeah, yeah.
example, that would be an example of someone who would probably want to have protesters against them.
Because it means that he is doing a
He
good
must be,
job. It
be
means, yeah,
correct of advocating his position if they are coming after him.
if they feel, this passionate about it, if they feel passionate about enough about it that they go out of their way to,
Correct.
protest
So it's a
at
very effective way to. So, but sometimes we have to catalyze that. So we'll do that.
oh, okay. So
So, for example, like let's just say an advocate, like a politician, wanted to have the opposition and then be like, these are the people, and then have them be totally ridiculous. Like, I was using the example of Wilders. If people were out there being like, I mean, this is just totally hypothetical, being like, we demand Sharia law today, right? And they're protesting Wilders. He would like that. He'd be like, yeah, this is who I'm up against, like, that would help him, because it would help him say, I am advocating common sense, and these people are advocating Islamic law, which is what he says he opposes, right?
he says a lot of things, yes,
I
but
mean, it's
it
kind of
is.
ridiculous. I don't know what it is with right wing populists. They all have ridiculous hair, whether it's Trump or Wilders or the
Yeah,
gentleman in Argentina, Millet. They all have just ridiculous hairstyles.
Boris Johnson in the
Boris, yeah,
UK. Yeah,
yeah, they all look totally ridiculous. Um,
it's
but
it,
Wilders is like looks almost very similar, kind of like a Trump. Is kind of the weird, very strange hair. I hope he won't be offended with me saying that, um, but
yeah,
he's
no,
an
but
odd
it's,
looking man.
yeah, he is not the most stereotypical Dutch, let's say.
Yeah, well, when you think of the Dutch, you think of kind of quiet, reserved, business like. Like, I think of Mister Rutte. The former prime minister who's
Yeah,
the
former
NATO,
prime
right?
minister.
He
Yeah,
feels Dutch. He's very kind of business like, very diplomatic, very kind of knows what the right thing to say, but doesn't kind of say anything undiplomatic. But yeah, Wilders is not your typical Dutch. What you think of when you think of a Dutch politician. That's for sure.
yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Like, and speaking on, the whole international thing. Do
Yeah.
you work internationally, or are you like, do
On
you
a very
collaborate?
selective basis. So as we talked about earlier in the program, um, a lot of nations, even kind of countries you think of as free countries, don't have the same free speech protections as United States.
Hmm.
So we have to be careful. We do marketing events and all of that kind of thing abroad for sure. But in terms of like advocacy and politics, we're very careful of what we do abroad. So it's not common for us to do that. But it's more common for us to involve ourselves in the United States in an international dispute. So sometimes if there's a international dispute that comes to the United States in some way, then we'll very much involve it because I have a background in international affairs, so I'm pretty well versed in kind of international kind of issues. So it helps us effectively serve our clients.
Okay. I mean, we recently here in the Netherlands had the NATO top, of
Yeah.
course, which is a very international event. There was quite a lot to do about it, actually. Would that be an event that you feel would be safe enough to involve yourself in, or is that too?
In what manner though? Like what would be the protest? I think part of the question is like if someone asked me to protest NATO, I'd be like a little nervous to say, okay, well, I don't want to take money from kind of the people who I would fear would
Mhm.
be have the interest in such a thing. So that would be my kind of reservation. But if you're saying, hey, NATO, well, like let's just imagine this, right? Let's just imagine there's some humanitarian catastrophe in Africa, and
Mhm.
we want NATO to involve themselves in that. We would totally do a demonstration saying, NATO, do the right thing and help the people of whatever country it is. So yeah, maybe something like that. Sure.
Okay. And I'm looking at the time, so I guess as a final question, I since ever since I got the news that I'm gonna host you, which I'm very thankful for. I went down a major rabbit hole, one that I haven't found myself in yet.
Uh-huh.
So I guess as a final question, how many of the protests that we see are organic, and how many are set up, if you will?
There's no such thing as an organic protest. It doesn't exist. And that's not a bad thing. Because the reality is that my definition of organic is do people have some incentive to do it, right? So like let me just like work you through what someone might think of as an organic protest that isn't, right? Well, let's just say you have couple moms get together at the school, right? They say, well, the textbooks, they're too old, right? That we need new textbooks in the school. Well, they go and they organize, they get 10 other moms, and they hold signs at the school board meetings. They say we need better textbooks, right? And they write, they call, they have meetings, right? Well, you would think, oh, that's very organic. They didn't get compensation. There wasn't some big group from a whatever supporting him. But at the end of the day, these women, I guarantee you, they weren't maids, janitors, housekeepers being able to do that. These were women who had flexible jobs, or men or husbands who work, or they had funding to be able to do this and to take all of this time and energy and maybe and some money to be able to spend all these resources, and that is not available to ordinary people in our country, right? Because they're too busy working and childcare. I mean, in the Netherlands, maybe this isn't the case, but in the United States, if you're making hourly wage, you have no time to protest whatsoever.
No,
Um,
definitely not.
so um, so at the end of the day, that isn't even organic. I mean, it's organic. It's yeah, they have genuine beliefs. Now, in one sense, it's all none of it is organic, and the other sense, it's most of it's organic. I think where you see where I think it is organic is most people out there protesting believe in the cause. They just have other reasons for doing it, right? Like people want to flex on Instagram, labor unions incentivize them. Obviously, companies like ours, compensate people. Some people go to protest to get laid. Like, think about Woodstock. I mean, the hippies were there to smoke weed and get laid. I mean, Vietnam was sort of protesting Vietnam, all that. That's kind of secondary, but they were there to smoke weed and get laid, right? So people have different incentives for being somewhere, and that's okay. So, but I think that there's this false dichotomy between astroturf, organic, and the reality is every movement from gay rights, civil rights, whatever, has been funded. There's backed by interests, but that's okay. Focus on the talking points. Do you agree with what they're espousing, or do you disagree? And stop trying to play this like crazy conspiracy game of who's behind it, because I guarantee you there's someone behind it.
Wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting that answer, but thank you very much for your clarity,
My
for your
pleasure.
honesty. Um, wow. Okay, that's. But yeah, no, it absolutely it makes a lot of sense, and as you said, the mothers, for example, um, yeah, they would have, if you have the time to, you know, go out and protest and make those signs, then
That's a funded
obviously,
protest. It's being funded just in a different way.
yeah, yeah, no, because they don't have to work or have to work as
They have the
much. So
flexibility. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. So it's not.
But people shouldn't. So people need to stop fixating on the incentives of the protesters and start fixating on, do they like what the protesters are saying? Do they agree or do they disagree? Because as I said earlier, the purpose of a protest is a catalyst and an awareness mechanism. It's
Mhm.
not an indication of where people are. So if you see like thousands of people protesting, that doesn't mean that the rest of the country agrees with them. That just means that's what they were there to do, right? It's pay attention. If you don't agree with them, you don't have to worry.
Focus on the message,
Focus
not
on the
on the
message,
people.
right?
Yeah.
Protest, what protest accomplishes is it gets the message in front of a lot of people. It then needs to grow from there.
All right. Well, I guess with that final final piece of advice, I thank you very much for your time. Thank you very
Pleasure.
much for everything that you have shared. It's cleared a lot of things up for me, at least. I hope for the audience as well. Where can the good people find you? Where can they find you if they so wish to make use of your services?
www.crowdsondemand.com. That's crowdsondemand.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter/X, it's at CEO, my name. So CEO Adam Swart. So if they want to do that. So yeah, feel free, get in touch. And but the reason I go on these shows isn't for publicity so much as to clarify all the misinformation that is out there about us. So I hope I did that for you and your audience. And it was a great, really fun spending this hour with you.
Yeah, no, likewise. As I said, it definitely cleared up a lot of things for me. I knew very little about it and was perhaps a little too much still in the conspiracy side of things, but this has definitely cleared it up for me. And to the audience, if you have any further questions, if this has maybe cleared up some things for you, please do leave them in the comments down below or contact us on Instagram, TikTok. We do now have a website as well. I believe that should be acrosstheponds.uk. I am not too sure about that, but it will, of course, be all in the video description down below. If you liked this video, do give the like, share it with with everyone. These are the kind of things that should be cleared up, the misconceptions that should be cleared up. Um, Make sure to subscribe to the channel with the notification bell on so you do get notified whenever we go live again, whenever we upload a new episode of the Across the Pond podcast again. So thank you all very much for watching. Thank you all very much for listening. Until next time. Bye bye, everyone.